at episode 26. Your CAQH profile is why you were stalled. So welcome and hello. I'm Lisa Reedsma with Craft Your Practice, and I'm a therapist like many of you. So you submitted your application in March, and it's now July, and you've heard nothing. By this point, you've probably told yourself that this is just how insurance companies are, that they're slow, that everyone waits, and that there's nothing to do but keep waiting. Some of that is actually true. Credentialing genuinely takes 90 to 180 days per payer, and no amount of pushing changes that. A large share of the therapists who think that they're waiting on a payer aren't waiting on anything. So their application stopped moving weeks ago, and it stopped because of a file that they filled out once, forgot about, and haven't looked at since. The file is called CAQH. As of June of this year, it's also been rebranded as DataSpring, so you'll start seeing both names, and it's the same login, the same profile, and the same rules. In this episode, you get what it is, why every payer reads it instead of reading you, and how to check in about 20 minutes whether it's the thing standing between you and getting paid. So part one, what CAQH actually is. When you apply to a panel, the payer doesn't sit down with your application and evaluate you as a person. The payer pulls your CAQH file. Once you see that, the rest of this episode is obvious. So CAQH is a shared database that most commercial insurance companies use to hold provider information. You fill out one profile, your license, your education, your work history, your malpractice coverage, your practice locations, your identifying numbers, and then you authorize the payers to look at it. The credentialing analyst on the other end is running that file against a checklist, and if any item on the checklist comes back incomplete, expired, unassigned, or inconsistent with something else in the file, the work stops there. And that mechanism changes what your application actually is. The application is a request, and the CAQH profile is the evidence that gets considered. The reason it fools so many therapists is that two things feel like they live in different places. You submitted the application on the payer's website, so the payer's website is where you go looking for news, while the actual bottleneck is sitting in a completely separate system. And you touched that system once months ago and never thought about it again. So you're watching the wrong door. I've gone through this in 5 states, both independently and through platforms. And the payer is almost never reading your cover letter, your resume, or your carefully written explanation. The payer is reading your CAQH file. Treat that file as the real application, because to them it is. Part 2, filled is not attested. A CAQH Part 2, filled is not attested. A CAQH profile has 2 separate states, filled in and attested. And a payer will only accept an attested one. This distinction costs people more time than almost anything else in credentialing, and almost nobody hears it before they need it. Filled in means you typed the information into the fields. Attested means that you formally signed off inside the portal that everything in the file is accurate and current as of that date. As far as the payer is concerned, An unattested file is a draft. Therapists lose months here without ever really knowing it. So you complete every section you feel finished, you close the browser tab, and then you go apply to 4 panels the same week. And the panels pull your file, find nothing that they're permitted to use, and your application sit in a queue that's going absolutely nowhere. So you did the work, you just never signed it. The sequence matters, and it's the opposite of what most people do. Build the CAQH profile, attest to it, confirm the file, and attest to it, confirm the file shows as attested and current, and then start submitting applications. Applying first and fixing CAQH later saves you nothing, because a payer who pulls an incomplete file doesn't put you back at the front of the line once you fix it. So in plenty of cases, the payer simply closes the application and expects you to start over, and you've burned a month finding that out. So the emotional weight of this is not small, and it deserves saying out loud. If you've been waiting since spring on a panel that never moved, and the reason that it turns out to be a signature nobody told you that you were supposed to give, that is genuinely enraging. So it's also extremely common. A system with real consequences was handed to you without no instructions, and you've been doing your best inside it. Part 3, the re-attestation clock. Attesting once doesn't settle the matter, because your attestation expires, and it expires on a clock that doesn't care whether you have an application pending. This is the piece I most hope you leave with today. CAQH asks you to reattest on a rolling cycle of roughly every 4 months. When that clock runs out, your file quietly drops out of a usable state, and a payer who pulls it during that window sees a profile that hasn't been certified and current. Think about what that collides with. Credentialing takes 90 to 180 days, and the reattestation clock runs on about 120, which means that for anyone in a normal credentialing timeline, at least one reattestation deadline is going to land in the middle of that application, and probably more than one. Your file can be perfect on one day, and you apply and stale by the time the payer gets around to looking at it. So nobody calls you when it happens, and that's the cruel part of it. The payer doesn't email you to say your file went cold, and the application doesn't get denied, which would at least be information. It simply stops advancing, and it keeps not advancing. And every week that passes feels like ordinary insurance slowness rather than a fixable problem sitting on your own desk. Silence and stalled look exactly the same from where you're standing. So the fix is a rhythm rather than vigilance. Vigilance fails because you're seeing clients and you're not thinking about a database, while a rhythm holds on its own. So put a reoccurring reminder on your calendar every 90 days, well ahead of the deadline, that says one thing: log into CAQH, review the file, attest. 90 days rather than 120, because the goal is to be early instead of exactly on time. Make sure the email address on your CAQH account is the one that you actually read, not a school address or an old practice address, since the reminders that do come will go there. That's the entire maintenance routine. 4 short logins a year, and you never have to lose a month to a lapsed signature again. Part 4, the 5 things that actually stall a file. When a credentialing analyst stops working on your file, it's usually one of a small number of things. And every one of them is clerical and fixable by you. The list is short and it's boring, and that's what makes it maddening. The first is a gap in your work history with no explanation. CAQH wants a continuous account of what you've been doing, and any break of more than a few months generally has to be explained in writing. Payers vary on how long a gap they'll actually tolerate before they demand an answer. So assume a lower threshold rather than a higher one. Maternity leave, a move, a stretch of unemployment, a year finishing hours, caregiving, a sabbatical, none of these are problems. An unexplained blank space is a problem. So write one plain sentence, put it in the file, and it's finished. Leave the space empty, and a human being somewhere is going to hold your application until you fill it. So the second is an expired document. Your license, your malpractice insurance, your DEA registration if you carry one, any of these things can quietly age out inside the file while you're busy with other things. So an expired document does not simply fail to help you. It actively blocks the file. So the third is one I see catch people over and over, and it's worth slowing down for. Your malpractice certificate of insurance has to match the entity that you're actually credentialing under. So if your policy is issued in your personal name and you're applying as your practice LLC, or the policy name's an old group you left 2 years ago, or the name on the certificate is a slightly different version of the name on your license, that mismatch will stop the file. It looks like a technicality from your side of the desk. To the analyst reviewing, it's an unresolved question about who exactly they're contracting with. And unresolved questions don't get waved through. The fourth is a missing signature or an unsigned release. There are authorization on documents inside CAQH that have to be signed and uploaded, not just acknowledged. An unsigned release means that the payer isn't permitted to pull your data at all, which means that your file might as well not exist. So the fifth is failing to authorize the specific payer. CAQH lets you control who can see your profile, and a lot of therapists never turn on access for the payer that they just applied to. So the payer goes looking, finds a locked door, and moves on to the next file in the queue. If your account allows it, set the authorization to allow all participating plans so that you're not doing this one at a time. Read that list again and notice what is not on it, and none of those items has anything to do with whether you're a good clinician, which is exactly why they're so infuriating. And it's also the good news. Since every one of them is fixable by you today without anyone's permission, part 5, the progress bar is lying to you. The completion indicator inside the portal is not a verdict on your application, and I gently take it away from you because it has misled a lot of good people. All it measures is whether the required fields have something in them. It doesn't know whether the document that you uploaded has expired, or that the name on your malpractice certificate doesn't match the entity on your license, or that you haven't attested since February. It's a form filling meter rather than a credentialing meter. It will happily tell you that everything is fine while a payer looks at the same file and sees a wall. The definition that matters is the payer's definition. Complete means every required section is filled, every uploaded document is current on the date. The payer looks every uploaded document is current on the date the payer looks. Every name and number is consistent across the file and matches your actual license and your actual entity. Every gap of any length is explained. Every release is signed. The payer in question is authorized to view you, and the file has been attested recently enough to still count. All of that at the same moment, or you're not complete. That's a lot to hold on your first hearing, and it gets much lighter once you've done it a single time. So building the file properly the first time is an afternoon of tedious work, and keeping it right afterward, that is 4 logins a year I mentioned, and the cost is entirely front-loaded, and the alternative is losing months at a time without ever being told why. So part 6. The 20-minute check-in. If you're stalled right now, don't start by calling the payer. Start with your own file. This takes about 20 minutes, and you can do all of it before you pick up the phone. So log in to your CAQH and look for the attestation date first before anything else. If it's older than about 4 months, that's very likely your answer, and you can stop looking. So review the file, correct anything stale, and attest. Next, open each uploaded document and check the expiration date on the document itself, rather than trusting the summary screen. So then read the name on your malpractice certificate out loud and compare it word for word against the name on your license and the name of the entity that you applied under. The names have to be the same, not merely close. Then look at your work history for any gap and make sure every one of them has a written explanation attached. Then check your authorization settings and confirm the payer that you applied to is actually permitted to see your profile. So fix everything you find, attest again, and write down the date that you did it. Only then call the payer, and when you call, ask one specific question rather than a general one. Has my CAQH profile been retrieved, and is anything outstanding on my file? That question is answerable by the person who picks up the phone. So where are you making progress on my application is not the reason for working in that order. Is simple. Every one of the problems on my list is something that you can fix in an afternoon by yourself. None of them can be fixed by waiting, and none of them can be fixed by a phone call. So check your own file first, because it's the only part of this process that you actually control. So if you've been waiting 4 months and you find out today that the whole thing was a document you could have fixed in 20 minutes, I know what that feels like, and losing a season of income to a signature nobody told you about is not a small thing. That reaction is the right reaction, and it is not a verdict on you. Almost nobody is taught this. The system assumes that you already know it, and then it never tells you when you don't. I put together a free credentialing timeline that lays out the whole process in order, what has to be done before, and where the waiting is real. It's free and it's at craftyourpractice.com/start. Fix the file first because everything else in credentialing moves faster once that one is clean. I'll see you in the next episode.